So for now, let's go into post-classical Asia. So if you're not already following us all over the internet, you really should. We're going to be starting up a whole bunch of new series on Twitter, on Instagram, on YouTube. For AP World, I have 19 key concept videos that specifically tell you exactly what you need to know for each concept. So I would really recommend going to my YouTube channel, especially. That's just youtube.com/thinkfiveable. And all right, so look, if you've been in these before, you know that I like to kind of put a bunch of stuff up on the lecture slide. In this case, I also kind of bolded and put in blue the kind of the key terms. But I'm going to kind of go through it as a little bit more like a story, because I think it's just useful to sort of hear this play out. And I know that, you know, for a lot of students, you don't really get a chance to just sort of like hear the information. So that's something that I'm definitely going to do, is just sort of kind of cut through it. I highly recommend taking notes just because it helps you learn. It helps you learn things down and remember them, and ask questions when you have them, okay? All right, so in the post-classical era, so remember that's 600 CE to 1450 CE. This is like, you know, after the fall of the classical empires. So now you've got these like new empires, and in these series that we're doing, these live events, we're sort of doing each region of the post-classical era, because I don't know, it's kind of an easier way to go through it. So in China in this time period, the three main dynasties that you'll cover of like post-classical, not including the Mongols, will be the Sui, the Tang, the Song. Anyone know how to pronounce this? Sui. There we go. Sui, Tang, Song. If you haven't memorized the Chinese dynasty song, you 100% need to do that. Okay, so the Chinese dynasty song will make it so easy for you to remember all of these. And just know, like, they're never going to ask you in the test what order do they go in, but knowing the order will matter a lot. So Sui, Tang, Song, and then the Yuan is after, right? That's the Mongols. So I'm not going to talk about the Mongols tonight. We're really going to focus on the three post-classical ones, right? Sui, Tang, Song. And then I'll go a little bit about Japan and Vietnam and Korea. Okay, so the Sui dynasty is 581 to 618. So before the Sui dynasty, things were in complete anarchy for 400 years, right? So after the Han dynasty fell, China was very much decentralized. Things were sort of in disarray, very similar to what was going on in Europe, right? So after Rome fell, there wasn't really one central power. Instead, it was smaller local rulers, and there wasn't really any centralized power. So the Sui dynasty changed that. They are the ones that unified China again. But they're not actually an empire for very long, right? So 581 to 618, that's what? I don't know, someone do the math, 30-something years, 40 years. So, you know, it's not that long. And the way that they come to power is pretty repressive. They are violent. They are, you know, expanding through their military, and really practicing this harsh rule. And so the way they come to power is really intense, and that sort of leads to their downfall later on. But they're really important because they are the ones that unify it, right? So it's not very long, but it brings it all together for later. They're also important for constructing the Grand Canal. So that's a key term that you should know. The Grand Canal is basically connects the different parts of China. China is massive, so it helps connect it, and really provides a way to transport rice and other crops to the south, which will lead to population growth later on. But the way that they do it is by conscripting peasants, so forcing the peasants to work for many years. So pretty harsh. So the Sui dynasty, 37 years. Thank you, Dylan. And people were generally frustrated by high taxes. They were frustrated by living under a dictatorship. You know, it's not fun to live under a dictatorship. And so eventually the emperor was assassinated, and that was the end of the Sui dynasty. So in a nutshell, that's the Sui. All right, let me see if there's any. Actually, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do Sui, Tang, and Song, and then I'm going to answer some questions. And then I'll go back and do Japan, Korea, Vietnam. Okay. All right. So a quick map. And by the way, this is coming from AMSCO. I think this is chapter, actually, I forget. But basically the Sui and Tang empires, the Sui dynasty was not all that big, right? So when we think of China, obviously we're thinking of modern day China. The Chinese empires in the past weren't always the same size. It's not the same borders all the time, right? So in this case, the Sui dynasty is the like darker version. This map looks a little bit confusing, but let me here. So if you look at like this is the coast right here. This is the Chinese coast. This would all be, this is water. This is looks a little bit confusing, right? So this is all water. So this is the Sui dynasty. This Tang dynasty was much, much bigger, right? It looped all the way down to Vietnam. Like this is modern day Vietnam. This would all be modern day China. And then this is up here would be Mongolia. You know, it's like almost up to Korea. So the Tang dynasty is much more expansive. This map is also kind of cool because it shows you the Grand Canal, which would be here it is. Here's the Grand Canal right here. Here, I can put my little pointer on. Here's the Grand Canal, and then here's the Great Wall of China that's going all the way up to here. So yeah, so just as a note, they're not the same size. The Tang Empire will be much, much larger. And the Tang Empire comes into place really right after the Sui dynasty is done, right? So the Tang dynasty expanded and the Sui unified. Yes, that's a perfect way to think about it, right? So the Sui is unifying things, kind of settling it down. They're very repressive and intense. And then once they're done, they are, you know, really just the Tang dynasty is much more about expanding the power. So within the Tang dynasty, this would be 618 to 907. Quick note about years, you do not have to memorize these years. I'm putting them up here to give you a sense of how long these things lasted, but you don't need to remember them. You need to know a general order of events, and if you do remember the years, great. But one of the things that they're known for is what we just talked about, expanding China, and really like bringing back some of those like, you know, traditions that existed in the Han dynasty. So the tributary system is one of the most important things that are connected to the Tang dynasty. Basically, they saw themselves as kind of the center of the world, the middle kingdom, right? And all the neighboring states around them had to pay tribute, pay money or goods in order to honor the Chinese emperor. And so they would come into China, they would come to the emperor and offer tribute. And so when they would do that, they would also do this kowtow, right? And so this image right here was on the AP World exam in 2017. And so this is a great example of like a really small thing that can sometimes pop up that if you knew this on that question, this was a short answer question, it made that question super easy. But this is basically, it showed you this image and then there was a set of questions that were asking about, you know, like essentially like what was going on in this picture. And so in this picture, this guy, let me actually use this guy right here is a like Central Asian nomad. I don't know how to pronounce it. It's like a Uyghur. And so they are coming to pay tribute. And then the way that they are bowing right here, that is what that is. That's the kowtow. And sometimes you hear that in terms of today, right? Like ways that people, politicians, anyone will sort of like bow to the person in charge. It happens, right? And then this would be like the Chinese official. So Jaegers, I don't know, nomads. All right, so the accomplishments. So the Tang Dynasty did some really dope stuff. So they brought back the civil service exam. Okay, that was huge because in the Han Dynasty and before, that's what really helped to set up a really bureaucratic society. And with bureaucracy comes a lot of things can get done. I mean, I know we think of bureaucracy as like red tape and stressful, and it can be. Like, it can be super intensive. But just having a bureaucracy means that more will be accomplished, because without it, you're sort of kind of all over the place, right? You can be a little bit more decentralized. And so bringing back the civil service exam made it really prestigious to be within the bureaucracy. And then made it possible to build these roads, to build the canals, right? Because you could have these people overseeing these massive public works projects. And it takes a lot. It is not easy to build massive roads and canals. Also, the spread of Buddhism was really prominent in this time period in China. So, you know, Buddhism, we talked about religion in the past, so I'm not going to go into the basics of Buddhism, but basically you have, you know, it's coming from India. It's sort of similar to Hinduism, except that there's no caste system. And so it will spread into China and then be sort of combined with, you know, with the Confucian ideals, right? So Buddhism in China looks a little bit different than Buddhism in India, than Buddhism in Japan, right? Religions are very much influenced by culture. So that's what makes the Tang Dynasty important. I wonder where your project is. It's kind of funny. So anyways, syncretism, yes. Where are my slides? Here we go. Okay. All right, so that's the Tang Dynasty. So just to recap, Sui unified, Tang expanded. Okay? And they expanded because of things like the civil service exam and the tribute system. Those are massive flows of money and, you know, progress. All right, the Song Dynasty. So the Song Dynasty is sort of like an extension of the Tang Dynasty, right? They're kind of similar. They are going to continue to expand. So they've got a massively expanded bureaucracy. More and more are like being put into education because of the civil service exam, right? There's such a focus on education. And all of those things are really good for stability, and it's really good for the wealth of some people, but it's really bad for the costs of the empire. So that's kind of one of the reasons why the Song Dynasty collapses, is because it's so expensive to have a bureaucracy, right? It will, the cost will very seriously add up. It depends on how you are taxing and all these different things. And so within the Song Dynasty, you get these kind of new classes of people, one of which is the scholar gentry. That's a term to know. And the scholar gentry are kind of like aristocracy that know a lot about Confucian theory. They're very well read, very well versed in Confucianism, but they don't have a lot of military experience. And what happens is they start to put them into roles to lead the military, and that leaves them really vulnerable. So that's a problem, right? Because then you have these people who are in charge of the military who don't know what they're doing. And so they know a lot about theory, but they're not very useful in the military. So eventually the Song Dynasty collapses because the Mongols conquered them. So that 1279 year is sort of the beginning of when the Mongols are in China. That's the Yuan Dynasty. Yeah, everyone got wrecked by the Mongols. That is fact. All right, let's go in here. Let's see. In post-classical China, how important were the Mongols and how did they heavily affect the post-classical world? So we're going to do an entire session on the Mongols, not next week, the week after. So, or actually in 2 weeks. So I'm not going to talk about the Mongols tonight. I'm just going to talk about post-classical Asia before the Mongols. But ultimately, we will get to the Mongols, and they are very important to China, right? They take over the Song Dynasty. Let's see. All right, what are the main differences between the Tang and the Song Dynasty? They seem pretty similar to me. They are very similar. You know, I think in terms of differences, I mean, I'm not even sure. I can't even think of any like off the top of my head. Maybe you guys have some. If you've been studying this, you can type it in the chat and let me know. Differences between the Tang and the Song Dynasty. They're very similar. They are both expanding territory. They're both very much a, okay, there we go. Song was weaker militarily. Yeah, that makes sense, right? So the Song dynasty, you have the scholar Gentry that are in charge of the military, so they're weaker. You're not going to really be asked to compare those two on an exam because they are pretty similar. But yeah, just know the order. All right, we'll get to that. What is the most important from the post-classical Asia period? The most important thing is China, honestly, because all the other places, as we'll see when I get into Japan and Korea and Vietnam, they are very heavily influenced by China. So when we talk about post-classical Asia, we're really talking about China and then how China influences the rest of the people. So I think, obviously not to take away from India. India has a lot going on as well, but I would say in terms of AP world history, post-classical Asia, China. Let's see. How important is it to remember the dates for the post-classical periods? So again, in any time period, there is no date for, let me just focus this one. There's no date in AP world that like you 100% have to know other than probably like 1492. That would be like the ultimate date to know, as Columbus sailed the ocean blue. But for the most part, there aren't dates that you have to know. You can get a 5 on the exam and not know the dates. You should know the order of the events, right? So that way you can do cause and effect, but you don't need to know the dates. Okay, skip. I'll come back to these other ones for now. What about the Uyghurs? Is that really how they're pronounced? Is worth knowing about, if anything. Not much. They're Central Asian nomads, and they paid tribute to the Chinese emperors. That's about it. During the Tang Dynasty. Yeah. Let's see. What would social class? All right, I'll get back to this. I love. Is there still a dynasty now in China? I like this because you have Mickey Mouse going, nah. So the thing, China, like in the last century, and we'll get there way later, but China will be a communist state, under Mao's regime. And then now there's sort of this like mixture of like communist capitalist state. It's not really a dynasty per se, but I'm sure in the long term we'll talk about this time period as some, name, but it's not really it's not really a dynasty. Are all the Chinese dynasties in the Common Era? No. Well, the Han Dynasty starts in BCE, and then Qin is before that. And the Zhao Dynasty is before that. So there are some that are before. Okay. Cool. All right. So let me keep on going. What dynasty started in BCE? The Zhou Dynasty and Qin and Han. Oops. Zhou. Yeah. I think that's how you say it. I mean, ultimately, like I do my best with like, pronunciation. It's a lot easier in like AP US history than in AP world. So we do our best, but if I say something wrong, oh yeah, the Shia and the Shang. Look, I forgot about 4 of them. There you go. See, Shang, Zhou, Qin, Han. There you go. Yeah. Am I right when I say China is only important in the CE, not the BCE? Well, it depends on who you ask. So if you are, I would say that more Chinese accomplishments and like massively important things to like the modern era are going to obviously happen in the last 2,000 years rather than before. But plenty of important things happened before that, like Confucianism, right? Confucianism doesn't exist before year 0. So, after whatever. So, that's part of it. Okay. All right. Let's talk about economics. So, this time period is massively profitable for China. Like underneath the Tang dynasty, they are very wealthy because of taxes. Like there's a whole thing about the Tang tax system. And so because of the way that they're taxing, because of tributes, because of trade, they're making a whole lot of money. So economic developments are really important in this time period. So one of the things that's important in this era is the equal field system. So there's going to be ideas about land reform in all of world history, right? It's like people own things and people don't own things. And so how do you redistribute it so that it's more fair? That's a huge question mark. And the equal field system is like one way that China approached this. So the attempt was to give all families in China land, that everyone should have an equal number of land parcels. And so remember, this is not because they were really nice and wanting to give out, you know, all this land to all these poor people. Instead, it was more about taking power from the aristocracy rather than giving power to anyone else. It was pretty effective for like 100 years and increased rural wealth, but didn't change the entire like social structure of China or anything. In terms of agricultural productivity, so also in this time period, China will produce a ton of agriculture, which means their population will go up massively. And so one of the reasons why is because they just have new methods of farming and new crops themselves. So if you remember anything about economics in China, remember this word right here. So if you're taking notes, this is the one to write down. Champa rice. This is like one of the most important crop, innovations in all of human history. Champa rice, it would ripen a lot faster than normal rice. And so that meant instead of yielding one crop harvest a year, they could yield two. That's double the amount of rice. And if you remember anything else from all the streams I've ever done, more food equals more people. And when you have more people, you have more ideas. You also have more conflict. But this is massive. This is coming from Vietnam. And because they have tribute in Vietnam, they have that connection. So Champa rice. The second is the Grand Canal, just like physically connected the areas. And basically this time period for China is called proto-industrialization. And this is important because they go through this process of proto-industrialization before Europe, even though Europe gets to actual industrialization first. And so this is the thing that you will have to sort of argue in some capacity. Like when you get to industrialization, this question around why does Europe industrialize before China when China was ready to do it first? They had everything going for them first. And the reason for that, which we'll talk about way later, is just the decision of China to sort of turn inwards rather than focusing on that. So, and there's actually a bunch of other reasons, but this is an important piece because China in this time period was productive enough, was doing well enough that it could have turned into more, and it didn't. And so it kind of begs the question of why. And so the last piece here is urbanization. So you just have faster growing cities because more people, right? So more people leaving the rural lands, moving into cities, tons of more people. It's also just like once you have enough food, if you can produce enough food, in the fields, then not everybody has to be a farmer. So people can move to the cities and find other opportunities. That's kind of that's why you have urbanization. All right, women in post-classical China. Biggest thing to remember about women in post-classical China is the foot binding. This began in the Song Dynasty. If you want to see some really just like messed up pictures, Google foot binding. So I'm not showing you a picture of what the feet look like, but look at the shoe. They would literally bind women's feet when they start at very, very young, and keep them in these shoes until they were, basically broken and shoved in there. I mean, it's really bad for your foot. And so it's just it's an example of this patriarchal society, right? Why did women have to do this? It was seen as very, high class. It was like, if you didn't have small feet, no man would want to marry you. That was kind of the sense of it. And so from a very young age, you'd have to start binding your feet. And that's messed up, And this went on until I'm pretty sure it went on until the 1900s. Even some women in rural areas in the 20th century. So it's pretty intense. And I think this is the takeaway, right? Yeah, small feet were considered beautiful. And so, why are small feet considered beautiful? That's just a decision that was made, and obviously not made by the person that had to bound their feet for it. So bind their feet for it. That's a weird past tense. I don't get it. All right. Okay. What time are you going to answer questions? I'll answer questions in a few minutes. So just kind of cutting through some more stuff. I just kind of like to go through things so that those of you that are taking notes kind of get it in one swoop, and then I can do questions. So add your questions when you have them. They'll get answered, and upvote other questions, but type them all in. Okay, other cultural developments. So, remember, in the Tang Dynasty, in the Song Dynasty, you have this expansion of education, and more people equals more ideas. So there's a whole bunch of cultural developments that come out of China in terms of inventions. I actually think I must have taken them off of the other slide. So it should have gone on this slide. But they're for example, in terms of trade, they invent things like paper money, a form of credit called flying cash, which is easily the best term ever. Right, so flying cash, it's not on the slide. I apologize for that. Actually, let me just, oops. Let me just put it here. So flying cash, this was trade innovations, paper money, flying cash, and gunpowder. Really important stuff. So, I didn't go to the beginning. Here we go. Okay, so we've got some big innovations that are happening that are making trade more widespread. You also have inventions of paper is already invented, but better paper is invented here. And then printing, woodblock printing, which was mostly used for arts, but could be used for anything. And so this is an example. This is obviously, this picture is not from post-classical China, but you can just kind of see, you make this block where you can then dip it in some sort of ink, and then you can kind of peel it off of this paper. And this is a super pretty one. And then the last thing is just reading and poetry. Anytime you have a good, stable time in history, the arts are going to flourish because people have time. I don't have to worry about my food. I can read. I can do things for fun. I can make pretty things. And so although most peasants were illiterate, books became more available because of things like woodblock printing. All right, so that is the end of China. And so, let's see. All right, so let me just head over in here and answer some questions about China before I go into Japan and Korea and Vietnam. Okay, anything that doesn't have to do with China, I'm going to skip for now, and I'll come back. How to trade routes. I'll go back to that. This question, what would a social class pyramid look like if it was made for the Song Dynasty? I'm not sure I understand that question, so I might have to just put it in a little bit different. Sorry. All right. Coming back to that. All right. How far the Chinese sphere of influence spread in the post-classical era? Absolutely throughout Asia. You definitely are going to see it. And this is exactly what we're going to go into. This is called Sinification, which is the spread of Chinese culture. And then people becoming more Chinese in their culture. It seems like a weird way to say it, but oops. So it is going to spread quite a bit in Asia because of the tributary system. That's a big reason for it. And then another way that it will spread, we can see influences of China all throughout Afro-Eurasia because of trade, because you have Chinese merchants who are trading just like Muslim merchants are. And so there's plenty of things that are being passed along. Some of those different inventions, paper money, the idea of credit, the idea of gunpowder. Gunpowder will spread significantly. So those are some of the examples that will come up. Okay. Let's see. All right, we'll go back to that. We'll go back to that. All right. Did they do foot binding to boys and girls? No, just girls. This is a very much a patriarchal example. This is something that was only done to women in order to control them, really. I mean, the idea of small feet being beautiful is a completely made up idea. So flying cash is a form of credit. No, but like it's not literally flying cash, but it's a form of credit, right? So you think of flying cash as like flying money, but what is credit, right? Like you swipe a credit card, like, I'm not going to show you my number, but there's a credit card and it's like, I don't know, it feels fake. And so it's kind of similar like that. So yeah, that's what flying cash is. Proto-industrialization. Okay, so proto-industrialization is basically the beginning stage of industrialization. So it means that you sort of start to have things in place. You're starting to create a lot of items that are no longer just like agricultural. They're not just crops, right? You're starting to like manufacture things, and you're not doing so on an industrial scale yet, but it's starting to have an effect on the society where we're manufacturing all kinds of other goods, right? Like silk, like cloth, like other like items. That's what proto-industrialization is like the preconditions for takeoff. Exactly, right? That's from like human geography. So you have this as like a step, like for a society to become industrialized, they sort of have to go through this stage first. And China does in this time period. And then Europe will a little bit later. Okay. All right. Let's cut over to Japan and Vietnam and Korea. And these will be a little bit quicker. It's one of those things where, in terms of like, what should you know for world history? That's one question. What should you know for AP World? That's another question. So you could study Japan and Korea and Vietnam forever in this time period, in any time period. But on the AP World exam, it's a bit minuscule. So this is it for Japan. One slide. So basically Japan, and I can kind of like sum this up. So Japan essentially was forced to adapt to China. China does not ever invade Japan in this time period, but they're really close, right? So Korea is very close, like physically, to Japan. And so you really do have the like presence of China is very much looming over Japan. So one Japanese emperor starts to, this is sort of like early in this time period, starts to kind of implement some Chinese practices. Things like, all right, I'm going to delete this. Things like a centralized government, right? Things like merit-based systems and putting bureaucrats in because of merit. That's like that exam system. And Buddhism spreading into Japan is because of China, right? It goes through China to Japan. And Buddhism today is still very much, very popular in Japan. And so you have this like sense of, doing things the way that they do them in China. And that will continue in the Taika period, these reforms, where they're sort of increasing efficiency and more centralizing their government. And that process is happening, and then everything slips back. So then you have the Heian period where everything goes right back to this like feudal society. So this is where most of what you'll see about Japan in this time period is in talking about feudalism, right? So next week I'm going to talk about Europe during this time period, but both Japan and Europe had feudalism in the post-classical era. And so essentially, so they're not like reverting culturally, they're reverting like politically and like economically. So going from centralized government with like a bureaucratic system and all this stuff, all back to a feudal system. So then it's like decentralized. So you have these different pockets. Yeah. Thanks for calling me on that, Dylan. So yeah, the way that I just said it, the way that I have it on here is like slipped back. And that assumes that feudalism is bad. And I don't know. I mean, it's hard to justify either argument. I think you could make an argument for feudalism being a better society, and I think you can make an argument for feudalism not. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. So I'll leave it at that. But they go into this decentralized time. And so one of the things that what that means is that you don't have a lot of social mobility anymore. You can't move up, right? You're born into your role and you stay there. I can't learn and become this other thing, you know? Like, we live in a society with presumed social mobility, right? You can go to school, you can get an education, you can get a degree, right? That's the like, you know, American dream, right? Is this, we live this idea of social mobility. Is it perfect in America? Absolutely not. But you can move up, right? You're not totally constrained to your family, your place when you're born. But it's what makes it different in Japan than Europe is really just a couple things. The different levels are called different things, right? So you have, you know, samurai and daimyo rather than like nobles and what are the other ones? Vassals, I forget. So it's not like it's they're just called different things. But the daimyo has more power than nobles. They just have more extensive powers. So I'm not going to talk too much about feudalism in Japan. I feel like you can get I don't know. It's kind of like if you get a question asking you to compare feudalism in Japan and Europe, it's like not even fair. It's like it's just like a hard question. So just just to know. Okay. All right, so that's Japan. And then we'll talk about Japan more too when we talk about the Mongols, because they don't conquer Japan. And that's a difference in that story because everywhere else is conquered. And this is all I'm going to say about Korea and Vietnam. Favorite slide ever. So basically in Korea, the Silla Kingdom was a tributary state of China. This is the Hermit Kingdom. And then you have Vietnam, who was also a tributary state of China. However, the difference is that in Korea, there was this like welcoming of Sinification. So Sinification is the process of like adapting to Chinese culture, right? So that spread of Chinese culture is called Sinification. It's like, I'm trying to think of like a similar, I don't know. So whatever, just memorize it. So in Vietnam, they didn't like that. They did not want to become more Chinese. They wanted to very much keep their culture. So it's just a difference between them. And in terms of AP World History, you do not need to know anything else about Korea and Vietnam in the post-classical era. Solid. Okay. All right, so let me go in and answer any questions now. Yeah, I mean, look, there's a lot that you can know about this time period, about Sinification, about all these different people. But I'm focusing on AP World History because this is what you are taking, you know, and like this is the focus. So If I say something's not important, I'm only talking about it not being important on the exam. It is obviously important in other realms, right? You could do a whole class on post-classical societies in Asia, of course. All right, let me close the slides and go into the questions. Okay, so if you have more questions, head over to the questions area and upvote or add them. So Chinese sphere of influence on Japan, Korea, and Vietnam. What are the big ideas in the spread of Chinese culture? Okay, so basically the biggest pieces that are spread are bureaucracy, centralization, Confucian ideals, right? This like focus on education would definitely be one. And then just like parts of the patriarchy, right? That would definitely be something that's spread. Other like systems, so like in different innovations would spread as well, like just the use of equal field systems or the use of any of these other things would be spread as well. Champa rice will spread across the lands because it works so well in one place, it works well in the rest of them. And yeah, so that's pretty much what you need to know. Was Genghis Khan ever convicted of his crimes against humanity? For sure not. That would be a really interesting trial. Sometimes like your teacher might do something like that with you, like put Genghis Khan on trial. That's kind of a fun thing. Maybe I'll do the Mongol session like that. It's kind of cool. But yeah, it's awesome to think about that. But no, there was never any consequences for his actions. And yes, yeah. So yes, Champa rice is an important crop. It's a very important crop because it leads to a massive influx in population because, again, 2 yields rather than 1. It's a whole lot more rice. It's double the rice. Does the Li Song War have any importance for the AP exam? No. Was it the most important crop of post-classical Asia? I'd say so, yeah. All right, can you talk a little bit about Confucian view of government versus the Roman Republic? That is a hyper-specific question that you really don't need to know the answer to. I would say that the Confucian style of government is very bureaucratic and merit-based in who has power. So you could, take this exam and there is some mobility in that. Whereas in Rome, it was a little bit more like the aristocracy, right? So like you had to be wealthy and a citizen and a landowner to be in power. So that would be one difference, is like who could work in government. That's the only thing I can think of off the top of my head. Okay, what's the difference between BC and BCE and AD and CE? It's the same. One of them is literally they just stand for different things. One of them is sort of based on this, like on Christianity. They're both based on Christianity. One of them, the words are more specific to Christianity. The other one is just saying a common era and before the common era. So we use now BCE and CE. And I don't really know too much more about why we've switched, other than it sounds better. Do the Barons cards actually help? That depends on how you learn. I mean, theoretically, you could make them all on your own. You could, use Quizlet instead. In general, know your key terms. Like, know your key terms. That's how you should study every week. You should, every single week, have 10 to 15 words that you are memorizing, because these key terms are everything on the exam. And so, if having physical cards that are already ready to go will help you, then yes. If actually making them is more helpful for you, then don't go buy them, just make them. I don't know. That would be my guess. All right. How did trade routes such as the Indian Ocean and Mediterranean have an effect on surrounding areas and on the overall world? This sounds like the question is taken directly from your homework. So I don't know. I mean, I did a whole session on trade routes, and I have a video about that too. I would say, I mean, a lot, right? Like they have an effect everywhere because they trade things everywhere. So the only reason why you get the spread of, Islam all the way to Indonesia, the only reason why you have, all these different goods spread across and all these different, this power spread across is because of trade. So I would say that trade is probably the most important thing in human history. That's just my own, like, I don't know. That's what I would say. Okay, quick question. What do you think might be asked on this topic as an LEQ? What spice questions might be included? What do you guys think? So what kinds of LEQ questions could be asked on post-classical Asia? Like what's a comparison question that could be asked? Or what's a CCOT question that could be asked? Other than like the most broad of just like, how did China change in the post-classical era? How did it stay the same? Right? Like if that were the question, then you could talk about staying the same in terms of Confucianism always being a strong force, patriarchy always being a strong force, bureaucracy always being a strong force. Then you could talk about changes as the tribute system and Champa rice. Another one, compare the effect of Sinification on Vietnam and Japan. That would be a really hard question, but doable, right? You could compare how Vietnam and Japan dealt with the spread of Chinese influence. Comparing feudal Europe and feudal Japan, that would be another example. I think that one is just, it's one that sounds like an easy question, and I just find it way harder. I don't know. So I wouldn't ask that one if I were a teacher or making the exam, but that's just me. Okay. Is flying cash literally flying cash? Yep. Do dynasties have to have a ruler? Can they have a president? So a dynasty has an emperor. President is specific to like a type of democracy. It's just we just changed the names of things, like we call it a president because we didn't want to have a king because we were coming off of British rule. So, you call it a president and then you give them powers that are different than the king. And you call it a king because it's more hereditary, but an emperor kind of is. I don't know. Tomato, tomato. So Japan adapted to Chinese culture, but eventually reformed and then went back to their old ways. Yes, that's exactly the history of Japan, right? So they start to bring in these ideas about bureaucracy and centralized government, and then they go back to feudalism, and then they way later on will go away from feudalism and back to centralization. So they just kind of go back and forth. Are there any specific people that we need to know from this era? Okay, so honestly, like people to know from this era, I wouldn't even necessarily like in post-classical Asia. I mean, yes, right? Like there are people, but I can't even think of one that I would absolutely have to know on this. There are for sure, I'm sure some of you guys can come up with names of people that are worth knowing. I don't know any off the top of my head. So what will happen is like in the Mongols, yes. I don't know. That's just me. Empress Wu, tough. All right, Genghis Khan we'll do later. 2 pages of notes, dope. How did Southernization affect post-classical Asia? I'm going to skip that one for now. Okay, the Taika and the Heian are the names of the time periods. And I'm not sure exactly what they mean, but those are just the names of their eras. So, we call things classical, post-classical, or we're calling them by their dynasties. These are sort of the names of the like family, the dynasty that was in charge. Okay. What are the Barons cards? It's just like flashcards that you can buy on like Amazon that just have like all the terms done already. Okay. All right. Well, I'm leaving the rest of these here. We've done a lot of questions. All right. So there's still quite a few of you here. So one of the things, so in the next several weeks, just as a heads up, I'm going to do a session on Sunday that is about just like how to study for how to use like breaks to study, right? Like you've got time coming up that you'll have off, right? Like Thanksgiving is not this week, it's next week. And so maybe you have the whole week, maybe you have part of the week, but you should start using it to start studying, you know, even if you don't have a test right after. Like you have a test in May and you're going to wish then that you did more now. So think about your future self, and this will help you this will help you to like get things done slowly, you know. The question is, do only replays cost money? So right now I've been doing the live sessions as free, but the live sessions will not be free definitely in the spring semester, and possibly not even in like December. They're all becoming part of the Fiveable membership platform, and there's a whole lot happening with Fiveable. So some of you guys have been with us since the beginning, but we're growing and growing and growing. So hopefully in the next semester, by next spring, we will have an app, hopefully, that will be really awesome. And I can't wait for that. Hopefully we will have, we're going to have a stronger community as part of this. And ultimately it's about helping students. And so I realize that charging any kind of money makes it difficult, but at the same time, it's like the cheapest support of what I'm doing that you could possibly get. Because a lot of companies are charging literally thousands of dollars for exactly what I'm doing right now. And I think that's ridiculous. Like I just saw Kaplan was charging like, what was it? It was ridiculous. It was like $200 and something for like 4 sessions. I'm like, why are you charging that much? So, you know, right now, I haven't even changed the price for November yet. So if you buy it tonight, it's actually like it's much better. Yeah, I realize that there's some student access that gets restricted. So if you are really facing a hardship in your family and cannot support it, then, you know, email me and let me know. I don't want to cut students out, but at the same time, we have teachers and we have to survive, and this is my full-time job, so it is what it is. So you can talk to your parents, talk to your school, see if they'll cover it. But you know, shoot me an email at hi@fiveable.me. If that still is cutting you out, then let me know. But you know, if you click replays and future live sessions, you can get AP World right now for $20 for the entire year. So I don't know how much cheaper I could possibly make it. So $20 for all year. It's not like a monthly thing. It's $20 and then you get it until July 1st. If you're taking more AP classes, then there is like, it basically you can choose one for $20 or you can get all of them for $40. So if you're taking more than one class, it doesn't cost anymore. So, you know, it's like paying for 2. You get all of them. And so that's a one-time thing, and then you have it for the whole year. And during the month of May, I'm going to be doing live sessions a lot. I'm going to be doing, you know, like every day of the week of the exam. And so you'll have, you know, front row seat at all of those and be able to study and pass. And last year, of the students that studied with us, 90% of them passed their AP World and AP US exam, which was insane. And 70% of them got 4s and 5s. So what we're doing works. Yeah, this is what we do, right? So I go live. I teach you all kinds of stuff. I'll have other teachers, AP World teachers, like guests doing stuff too. Once we get to the spring, we're going to do like practice questions together. So it's not just like lectures, and always making sure your questions get answered. You know, seeing if you need me to, if you want me to read one of your essays, I can do that. And just kind of like growing and learning together. So that's pretty much it. Anyone have any questions about Fiveable? Cool. All right. Well, this was an awesome session. There was a lot of you guys here tonight, and I think we're in a good spot for post-classical Asia.